This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Briggman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project with your host, Sal Briggman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillrite is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at fulfillrite.com. Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman, and on this show, we get into how to successfully raise money with Kickstarter, with crowdfunding, how to do some of the stuff that kind of seems like it's really easy for other people to do. But when you hunt into it and when you kind of dig into it, launching a campaign is actually kind of hard. There's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of parts, and I always felt super frustrated in my own life when I would try to accomplish things, and it always felt like there was a missing piece of the puzzle. You ever see people be really successful and they kind of do it with ease, and like you try to do the same thing and you kind of fall flat on your face? I felt that way so many times in my life, trying to accomplish different things, even if it's just learning a new sport. I was a fencer. I did fencing for 10 years, and when I was first getting started with fencing, I was horrible. Like, I really was not very good. You see Zorro movies or you see people play fighting on television or on movies and stuff, and it's like, it shouldn't be that hard. But I remember thinking, wow, feels so unnatural. It feels just really weird, the stance and all the ways you're supposed to approach your opponent. Like, why can't I just run at this guy with a sword, right? But over time, I started to learn more, and I started to get better, and I started to fence other people that were a lot better than myself. And one of my teachers at that point in time, she was like a former Olympian, and she brought me aside, and she started to actually mentor me after the classes because she thought that I had a little bit of skill, a little bit of, merit in terms of where I was progressing so quickly. So she took me aside, and free of charge, she was willing to spend like 30 minutes with me after each class and teach me some of the things, some of the tricks, and some of the ways that I could actually get better at fencing. And that's why when I actually did my first competition, and I was a lot younger then, probably like 16, I'd say, I blew the competition out of the water because I had basically gotten access to all of these techniques and ways of going about against your opponent and how to deal with certain situations when you're in a fencing, you're in a match. And I had learned all these things because she taught me, and otherwise I would just be kind of trying to figure it out myself. And that's kind of an analogy for what I try to do here is not only do I share with you real world examples of entrepreneurs and creative types that are in the trenches right now, but for those of you that are interested in working one-on-one with me, I also offer that option. I also put out other more comprehensive educational information, online courses and books and audiobooks, and I can tell you a little bit more about that at the end of today's podcast. But that really stuck with me, that experience, that just having access sometimes to the right people or to the right mentor or to the right person can really radically shift the results that you're seeing when you're trying to have some kind of a goal that you're trying to accomplish. Or you're trying to get better at something. You can always go about it yourself, but it takes so much longer. And it's so much harder because you're only working with your own problem-solving abilities. There's so many other examples of that, like in my own life, where when I started playing chess, I was a nerd. I tried to do like chess club when I was in high school, and I was really bad at chess when I was first getting started because I would just kind of try to solve the problem myself. And I never understood how these kids were so like brilliant and genius at it, and I was beaten so many times playing chess. And then finally someone pulled me aside and says, there's actually a strategy behind this game. I'm like, a strategy? What do you mean? And they started to introduce me to well, if you read this book, it actually outlines some of the ways that you can approach your opponent. If they have this kind of defensive strategy or this kind of offensive strategy, this is how you deal with it. And I started to read up a bit more on how to play chess, the actual strategy behind it. I started to play online games. And when I started to do that, I got so much better, so much more quickly. And all these situations that I was seeing start to look way more familiar when you see the chess pieces kind of look similar to the way that you were reading about it, and you feel so much more confident. And I started to win game after game and started to get a ton better. And just because I had access to this information, my results got so much better, just like with fencing. And that's my goal here with you. So I hope you take a lot out of today's podcast episode and that you really try to apply this to your campaign. And also at the end, I got some resources that I'll share with you. But without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we're talking with a multiple Kickstarter success who's launched 3 different projects on Kickstarter, has learned a lot, and has come on the podcast to share some of these hard-earned lessons with you. Also to get into a little bit of things that we don't really talk about always, which is like shipping, what it's actually like to start a business, all these different things we're going to talk about today. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Do you think you could start by just giving the viewers a bite-sized idea of when you started getting involved with crowdfunding and sort of what got you into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to start a company when I was in high school making a trading card game. And I was trying to go to Harvard and do a bunch of other things, so I didn't end up doing it. Then I ended up going to the University of Florida, and I entered a pitch competition and won. And then I started presenting the idea more and decided to actually make this game. And unfortunately ran out of money. I put a lot of money into artwork, didn't have enough to finish it the way I wanted to finish it. And I was like, this is a good second project. Let's start with something else. So I stopped mid-project and started another game, which was originally going to be a war-themed game, and then I was like, that's too generic. I wrote a story about annoying neighbors and was like, it just clicked. I was like, okay, the game is a war on your neighbors, not a war. And so it became Cul-de-sac Conquest, and I'm a writer, so all my game names are alliterations, just a weird aside. So I made Cul-de-sac Conquest, and we knew we couldn't afford, my partners and I at the time could not afford to actually manufacture it unless we went to Kickstarter. So we went to Kickstarter, and fortunately we were able to raise about $20,000. And then I sort of realized like, I actually really like making games. I should make this a thing. Like, let's not just make this the only project. So we made a few more games, and my partners have since left the company, and it's only me now. But now I'm focusing on kind of expanding the branding as well. So we're doing comic books as well as board games and novels now. That's
awesome, man. What was this first project like? Because I know it can be really nerve-wracking when you're kind of going live and you're showing your artwork and your game to the world. Like, what was that like with the first one?
It was pretty crazy. So I got a loan for the artwork in order to pay the artist, and I had a lot of money into it, even though I think that's something people often miss, is even I was trying to do it cheap because I was in college, so I didn't put as much money into marketing as some creators do, but I found a unique theme, and I thought that would help draw people into it without having to invest as much into advertising. I thought people would organically talk about it a little more than if it was like a game of knights or zombies or something that's typical. And so I think that helped me a lot. But I did still have a lot of money into it, for at least for relative to what income I had. And so I think it is really nerve-wracking. And so one of the things that I think was particularly crazy for me is, like, I'm a college student. I had no money. I was like, how am I going to get people to give me $10,000? It just seemed like this insurmountable goal. And so I did as much as I could. Like, we did initial launch parties and did as much as we could to get day one backers, because we know that mattered to the Kickstarter algorithms and that it would help us fund and, get all of our stretch goals quicker. And I think building up that hype beforehand and trying to do as much free marketing as possible. So, like, I tried to become friends with people in all the Facebook groups for board gaming. I tried to find where the communities were, and I just became a part of that community. I went to conventions, and if I most of the time couldn't afford to go by myself, so I would find other publishers and try to work with them. And so I worked for a lot of other publishers at conventions to increase my ability to go and meet people without having to spend more money, because I was doing it frugally. So
when it comes to the page too, like I love the design of Cul-de-sac Conquest. When you're putting together this page, like how did you find people to help you with like creating these reward tier images and graphics and like all that stuff?
So I was fortunate. When I was working on the first game, there was an art and graphic design group for tabletop games on Facebook, and I posted, hey, I have this automotive racing game, which was the game that I couldn't afford the artwork for. I said, but I need this card design. And I met this gentleman, Sebastian, and he helped me with doing one of the card layouts. And then I saw his work and was like, wow, this guy's incredible. So I've worked with him on all of my projects at this point. And so I was fortunate to find him. But I'll find artists on Behance. So it's like Adobe's website for creatives. So I find people that match the style I'm looking for. And then I try to, as an art director, give them some guidance, but not too much, because I want them to still be creative and come up with things that maybe I wouldn't have thought of. So I try not to be like too structured with any of that. So like for the Kickstarter page, I told Sebastian, here's the headers that I want. And here's a general idea of the things I want and the reward graphics. And then he makes the graphics and normally would do way better and cooler stuff than I would ever come up with if I told him exactly what to do.
So you basically you've wanted to start a business, it sounds like, from kind of an early age, and you were doing more formal stuff like being engaged in like pitch competitions, entrepreneurship and stuff. I think a lot of tabletop card game creators, they don't really think of themselves that way. They sort of think of themselves more as like a creative person than like an entrepreneur. What has it been like to actually go from, making the artwork and conceptualizing the game to building a business out of it, that sort of transition there?
So growing up, I was always a writer, so I definitely had some of that creativity. But my dad worked as a manager at an AT&T store that my uncle owned, and a majority of my family are entrepreneurs. So my uncle has owned a tree farm pretty much my whole life, and one of my other uncles owned like the AT&T store, like I said, and he owns other technology companies. And so I had a lot of entrepreneurs in my family that kind of always got me to be like, oh, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And then it sort of, like you said, most game designers end up being publishers kind of out of necessity, or they don't want to lose their creative control, but not so much that they enjoy the business end of things or anything. But I definitely came from it I wanted to start a business, and then it just so happens that as a creative person, this made sense as the business I started. But I was going to start a business, whether it was this or something else.
Why do you think it's so challenging? Like starting a business from scratch, obviously you got to do a lot of stuff. You got to figure out the logos, names, website, like get all the distribution down. Like, what do you think is so challenging about the actual starting of one?
I think it's inexperience. I think the biggest idea is people are trained to kind of just do as they're told a lot of times. So like as an employee, you're told to do things, and then you have to just do whatever they want you to do. When you have to actually formulate your own ideas of, okay, this needs to be the main priority, and I need to do this and that and the other thing. And so like creating regular to-do lists, and then you also have to be the visionary person that's like, okay, this is what we need to do in order to be a successful business. But also like it's particularly challenged with a creative business because you want to develop games or whatever product you're making and do well with it on the consumer level, and as a business, obviously financially profit from that. But at the same time, on the creative level, you don't want to just turn out stuff just because it appeals to people if it's not actually a good product or something you're passionate about.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's always that balance,
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely the dichotomy that you wouldn't have in normal businesses where you just be like, oh, this makes us money, we're doing that. But in creative businesses, it's a little different. You kind of have to feel a passion and understand, like, I get why this is a good project and why I want to work on it.
Yeah, I think also the big difference there being like if you buy, I know you go and buy a mug or you buy a water bottle or something like that, like there isn't that much emotional attachment to it. But when you're playing a card game, like you're creating memories out of that. You're playing with your friends. There's so much more emotion attached. Like I remember playing Munchkin when I was younger. Like that's like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of style game, and like Magic cards. And those are just like incredibly fond memories. And you almost have this emotional connection to the brand. So it's almost like it's a very different kind of business also, I think.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we seek to do as publishers, is to create these lasting impressions on people. And the one cool thing about board games that I've always really liked is this ability to connect with other people. So a player is not normally playing, there are solo games, but for the most part, you're connecting with other people and establishing these relationships and building connections. So a lot of times you might not know the person that you're playing games with at first, and then you become really good friends with them. I've joined a lot of game groups just to play games, and then the people are such good friends now that it doesn't have to be games that we're playing. Like we're just naturally friends. And I think that's cool, and that's something that's interesting about games, and it gets people together, even if you have been friends for years.
Yeah,
I was
totally
able to play games with family and friends that I didn't get to connect with as much. And because we created this recurring board game night, I got to spend a lot more time with them and get to know them better than I probably would have without board games facilitating those conversations.
One of the questions I had for you is, I think when you're trying to come up with like reward ideas and just rewards in general, there's this whole misnomer between, well, first of all, you got to be creative enough to come up with interesting rewards, but then you also have to fulfill those rewards. You have to ship out these things to backers, and you've sort of seen that a few different times play out. So I think you might have a good idea of, in terms of coming up with perks and rewards, do you have any advice for those people out there in the audience?
So there's a few things. One is I think people forget that what their mission is, I guess. So you have to know what you're going after. So if I'm making a board game, my game is the focus. That's the main product. If anything else is on the campaign page, it has to drive that product in some way. So if I have an upgrade or something, if I wanted upgraded components, but I can't afford to include that in every pledge, having a more deluxeified edition of the game is an additional reward tier that might make sense. Obviously, you have to think about whether you're able to manufacture those additional deluxe copies and how much cost consideration is there as well. You have to look into the shipping and logistics of everything. And it's whether you think the logistical complications of adding additional reward are worth the benefits in terms of dollars and cents, basically. So if I have a rewards here and I think 5 people are going to get it, and it costs me $200 and I'm going to spend $100 in shipping them, then, maybe for an extra $100, it's not worth my time. So you kind of have to weigh and kind of do analysis of whether a lot of people will back this for that level. So I think I just started getting into comic book projects, and I've been backing a lot of them, and I think that's where I see this more so than board games. But they'll add reward tiers with T-shirts and bookmarks and all kinds of stuff. And obviously, what happens with that is now, in addition to making this comic book, you have to print a minimum number of T-shirts, and you might have only sold 2, but the minimum order to get it to be feasible and cost effective, you might have to order 50, and you're going to be sitting on a lot of inventory of a product that's supplemental when the main focus and core of that campaign should be the book or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. There's also this idea of shipping, because if you're going to go live with a project, you're going to have people around the world. Looking at your first campaign, it was like people from Canada, UK, Germany, Sweden, people that are all over that are expecting to receive this on their doorstep. Even your most recent, Mutant Crops, that's from Netherlands, Singapore, Mexico. How do you figure out like shipping with all of this stuff? Do you have any hacks or advice there?
So we use some fulfillment centers around the world. It tends to be easier than having to ship them out myself, and for the most part, it seems more cost effective. Also, if you have fulfillment centers in Europe, as a company, I pay VAT tax rather than our consumers, which is something that Kickstarter backers really care about, especially in the board game space. Because if a game is over a certain threshold, depending on the country, they might be charged tax, and sometimes that tax can be as much as the product cost. So if shipping and tax and stuff is just as much, if not more, than what they paid for their product, obviously they're going to be incentivized not to buy that product. It's just too much additional cost. And so lowering some of those expenses for consumers is definitely ideal. And so we try to do that as much as we possibly can. But the main thing is finding fulfillment companies who have done it before. They normally get discounted shipping rates. And even with the rate they charge to like package it and do all the work for you, it's not all that much different, I found, than if I just did the work myself. And then I don't have to do that work and can focus my energies on other stuff. And I work full time and do this. So I don't have too much time. And I think as someone who went to school for marketing, I realized the importance of marketing, and that's where I excel. And I rather put my energy and effort into that versus packaging rewards for people.
If you have a full-time job here, like that's really difficult to obviously juggle the two. So this is kind of like a passion and also something you're really excited about. You're selling products, and that's really cool. What are your thoughts on that, and like juggling the full-time job and doing this as a side project? I feel like a lot of people out there are kind of doing the same thing, or they're hoping that this will one day become, their full-time gig. And we have a lot of people on the podcast who have now like 10 employees, 20 employees, and they're doing their full-time creative work, which originally was just like a side thing,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main thing is there's some people who are just doing it as a side thing and will always be a side thing. I've met creators who they love their full-time job, or their full-time job makes them so much money they would never make that much money, and they're comfortable with their lifestyle and wouldn't want to change that. For me, it has always been a thing where my goal is to just run my own businesses and not work for anyone else. It's not like my full-time job is bad though. Right now I'm working with my family on my uncle's tree farm as a general manager, and I enjoy it. So it's not like I need to leave there anytime soon. But it is challenging. It's hard to go home from, especially like right now I'm working in the sun a lot, to go home from working all day and then work more. And there's some nights I wake up at 6 to go to work. I go to work from 7 to like 3:30, come home, take a shower, and then work until like midnight. Obviously that can definitely get challenging. And I think that's why a lot of people don't want to do entrepreneurship. That I think there's a lot of reasons why people view entrepreneurship as like the sexy thing, and then when they actually learn kind of what it entails, a lot of people are like, oh, maybe I don't really want to do that. Maybe this isn't just like Shark Tank.
I gotta introduce you to a killer resource, The Gadget Flow. Their website reaches more than 28 million people per month. Brands like DJI, HP, and Pioneer have used them to increase awareness and boost sales, along with more than 4,000 crowdfunding campaigns. They have a new unboxing series on YouTube where you can get your product unboxed by a tech expert. Lastly, you can get feedback for your crowdfunding campaign and increase conversions by using Crowd Insight. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com.
And so I think that was something that I kind of knew going into it, because I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I don't think I realized how long it takes. And there's so much to learn. And I wasn't afraid of like, oh, I don't know how to do this as much. I did fear it a little bit. I was like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Especially like when the first campaign funded, I was like, oh, now I have to figure out how to do all this stuff. But when you learn and you develop those skills, and then it kind of becomes second nature, and you're always learning. Like I'm still learning stuff. I have been trying to do a lot better with my marketing efforts, because the first campaigns, like I said, I didn't have as much money. Now that I have a little bit more, I'm doing more about lead generation on Facebook to get email list subscribers, trying to get my email list to grow to several thousand emails instead of several hundred. So I'm doing all that kind of stuff and learning, and you have to obviously keep learning and developing as a business. But I'm also more strategic now that I've learned a lot of the main crucial things. Now, I know I'm not going to lose as much money on things like the first game you do or the first project. You might you definitely will make mistakes, but some of those might be costly. And if you do it on a smaller project, it's not as
bad ramifications.
Yeah. The ramifications aren't as bad. So the consequences of messing up, as you get further along, are higher. And so I wanted to learn with some smaller projects and take a little bit of time. And now that I've developed and feel like I have a good sense of what I'm doing, now I'm trying to scale up a lot. So that's why I implemented changing the direction from just focusing entirely on board games to expanding our product offering and trying to integrate our products into like IPs that there'll be a comic book, and then that comic book might within the same IP also have a board game, and then I can sell those projects together in the same Kickstarter campaign, or I might be able to sell them together at conventions and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to get my customer base to, have more things that they enjoy, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart idea. It's almost like you're creating the world almost for these different games. And, now you're starting to sell on Amazon. Like I see your Amazon listings here. So you're starting to build it out. I just think that the hardest part is, as a beginner, getting people to actually even play your game. Like that's such a difficult thing. But then once you find out that people are and they're enjoying it, it's like it can really light you up. Like what's your favorite part of this whole process?
I definitely really enjoy getting pictures from people around the world, enjoying a product I made as a creative. That is definitely the thing that keeps me going. As an entrepreneur, obviously I want money coming in and other things, but I try to weigh and balance those two, where I'm not just like a normal, entrepreneur where it's like money, everything. I don't care so much. I want it to make enough money to eventually pay me and hire staff and grow the company. But I also am not just like all dollars and cents. For Supernatural socks, it cost me a little bit more to include a pair of socks in the game. And I was like, I have to do this. I don't care if it loses me money. It's going to be a thing. So it came with a custom pair of socks because I thought that would be funny. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of part of it, is weighing out the creative and not just always focusing on money. And then because of that, I've got some of those experiences that I look for of people playing the game, and they text me a picture of them wearing the socks or them throwing the socks across the table. And I'm like, that's pretty funny that something I included the game, that people actually care about this and they think it's cool. So.
Yeah, I feel like it always reminds me of like that Steve Jobs quote where you think about all the things that are created around you and they're created by other people, and you can kind of impact other people's experience of life with the things that you make, which is just so profound. And then you realize that, and it's like, wow, that person is, in this other country and they're wearing the socks that I made, or they're playing the game that I created. I just think that's super inspiring.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. It helps me feel like when things aren't going as well, that I can push through. And you have times when customers are negative or people are complaining, or you'll get emails and get bombarded with stuff. And during those times when it's particularly stressful and money's tight or whatever, it's nice to get some of those images and get some thoughts from customers who are actually like, I love your game and I play it all the time. And it's like, all right, that's cool. I made I made this thing happen. And even the games I didn't design, but I published, I'm like, it wouldn't exist without my company. And it's cool seeing the designer all excited because a game they made is published, and, I played some little role in making their dreams happen. So,
do you have any advice on the front of getting people to review your game? Because I think that's also really challenging.
So with board game stuff, there are a lot of reviewers that are interested in doing it. It's just finding the ones that cater to your particular audience. So a lot of my first 3 games, like we've talked about, were silly. There was a game about lost socks, and a game about mutated crops, and a game about annoying your neighbors. So I wasn't looking for these serious reviewers that are, gonna have their monocle on and review a serious game. So
I gotta start wearing a monocle.
So I was going for the reviewers that are like, this game is ridiculous. All right, cool. And then Ruins of Mars, which is coming out September 24th, which is my next like bigger project. it's completely different. And so the audience of reviewers that I needed for that are different, because I more want the monocle wearing like serious board gamer game. So it's finding who fits your audience, and a lot of that is just the groundwork of looking into stuff. So go on YouTube and find reviewers and figure out which ones you like, why you like them, what kind of games they're reviewing. If it's not a game similar to what you're designing, then they might not be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
So.
When it comes to that new one you're working on, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So Ruins of Mars is a heavier like strategic strategy board game. So it's a 60 to 90 minute game that plays with 2 to 4 players. It is a really cool action selection game. So you're selecting one of 5 locations on the board, and then you're getting whatever that action says. But what's interesting about it is that the actions aren't definite based on what the board says. There are tiles called action tiles that are below each site, and they actually determine what resources or benefits you get from taking that action. So if I wanted to learn the Martian technologies and uncover some of that stuff to get the resources in order to build and replicate those technologies, I would actually need to go to a space that allows me to get those resources. But what resources I actually get are based on the tiles below it. And then every time a player takes an action, all the tiles shift in a Mancala-esque fashion. So one tile will stay at that location, and then the next will kind of move around the board to the right. And so each action varies per turn. And so I think that's something that's really interesting and unique about this game, and it's going to help sell it. And the artwork is beautiful.
Cool, very cool. When it comes to the launch for this new one, like you've done a few of these projects already. You know, you have 3 campaigns out there on Kickstarter, so you're getting more seasoned with these launches. What does a launch look like for you nowadays when it comes to this new project?
So after doing my 3 projects, I also started doing consulting. So I've consulted on 2 other projects for other creators, which was good for them and me, because I learned additional stuff about Kickstarter as well. And so now that I've effectively worked on 5 or 6 projects, I do a lot of things different with my campaigns. So I did a lot more of marketing date well in advance. So I let people... I've been talking about Ruins of Mars for probably a year on all the Facebook groups and to all the audiences that would be interested in it. And I want, with marketing, it's all about impressing on the same people multiple times. They're not going to buy if it's the first time they've seen anything about it. So I want them to know about the project and see it several times before it ever reaches Kickstarter. So when they see it on Kickstarter, they're like, oh, okay, that's that game I've heard so much about. So building up that hype beforehand is the biggest thing that I do now that I probably didn't do as well early on. So I have done a lot more with Facebook ads, creating lead generation, like I said, to get more email lists, creating ads in order to promote the preview link on the Kickstarter is something I've been doing. And Kickstarter actually just added a feature where once your campaign's ready and approved, you can share a preview link that just shows the main image and like sort of like a countdown clock. It allows you to get notified when it launches. So if I click that button, the second the campaign launches, I'll get an email that it launched. And so I have hundreds of people now that have requested to be notified when it launches. So with Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general, you want to get that early traction. And so that's the main thing that I try to shoot for, is getting at least 30% of the funding in the first 24 to 48 hours, hopefully more than that. So setting my goal and looking into all the costs and everything around that, and then trying to see if we need $10,000, how can I get at minimum of $3,000 the first day.
Another really good hack is, so there's sort of like, I would say, you talked a little bit about having multiple impressions and sort of multiple strategies there. So definitely having people be notified within Kickstarter itself, and also having people create an account, like even if they don't have a Kickstarter yet. But one of the things I've been experimenting a lot more with is after people opt into a landing page, talking about email open rates nowadays, you probably only get like 30% of the people that opt into the email to actually open the email, right? So you have to think about other ways as well to actually get people to show up on day one. So doing something like having, after they opt in, having a page where they can either subscribe to a Facebook Messenger bot, or having a page where they can also add this to their calendar to be notified when you go live. You can think of a few different ways. I'm just talking to the audience here. A few different ways to improve the show up rate, if you will, of people that come to the page, and sort of having a pronged approach to that, I think is really important.
Yeah. Marketing and anything really requires you to do several different strategies. That way, if one doesn't work, that you're not just SOL. So, I mean, I think that's definitely a very good point. You don't want to be scrambling the last minute, realizing, oh no, our Kickstarter just launched and no one's backed it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of projects that go on Kickstarter and get next to no backing, and a lot of great campaigns. I see it with comics all the time. I look at projects that are beautiful and they just don't know how to market it. And I think that is always something I stress to people, is let people know about it well in advance, let them know why they care, and don't expect that Kickstarter or whatever platform you're on is going to organically find you people. They might if you bring your audience first, but you have to bring that audience first before they'll send anyone your way.
One sort of final question I have for you here is, so if you're marketing like a physical product, it's pretty easy to say, hey, do you want to have improved whatever, or do you want to have these benefits? It's very benefit promised focused with what the product does. When it comes to a game, it's more about selling the experience, I imagine. How do you appeal to people with that sort of pre-launch when you're doing ads? Are you comparing this to another game that they might know? Are you saying that, are you using a testimonial from a player? Like, how are you getting their attention that this is something that's going to be fun for them to try?
Various things. I'll share art updates. I'll ask for their feedback on stuff. I'll post like a picture of a character and ask what their backstory is, and have people write in their backstory. Sometimes I'll write a backstory and say, here, this is blah, 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 from Ruins of Mars, and just kind of briefly mention the name of the project. But the most part of the post is to share the story, and this story for me matters a lot. Like I said, I've always been a writer, and like my slogan for when it was just Atheris Games, when I do the game advertisements, is a story for every game and a game for every story. So I'm definitely big on storytelling, and so I think that's one thing you can do a lot. And then I think the biggest thing that people don't realize is you have to create value. People will want to help you if you've provided value to them in some way. Mm-hmm. And so I write a lot of blog posts and try to create content that's valuable to the people in my audience. And then when they read it and engage with it and follow me, if they happen to also like to buy my board games, cool. If not, I like to help other creators. So I'll post articles about like Kickstarter and how they could improve their campaigns. I posted about stories for our various games, anything that I think might incentivize them to click on it and read it.
Sounds cool. Where can people go and learn more about this upcoming game that you have going on, and also more about your work?
So our website is Atheris Entertainment, ATHERIS.com. I'm on social media as Atheris Andrew, and all of our social media, we have Atheris Games, Atheris Entertainment, and Atheris Publishing for publishing and gaming divisions in the parent company. They can follow our work on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll post stuff. BoardGameGeek.com has information about the game, including the rule book, if anyone wants to check that out. And then the Kickstarter preview link is posted at the top of our Facebook page for Atheris Games. So if they wanted to get notified on launch, that's where they could do that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it coming on the show, sharing all this great stuff, and I wish you a lot of success in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Shipping and mailing from your desk has never been simpler than with SendPro Online from Pitney Bowes. With SendPro Online, it's just click, send, and save for as low as $4.99. That's $4.99 a month. Schedule package pickups and track shipments from departure to arrival. And for being a CrowdCrux listener, you'll receive a free 30-day trial to get started and a free 10-pound scale to ensure that you'll never overpay. Just go to pb.com/CrowdCrux to access this special offer for a free 30-day trial plus a free 10-pound scale to get started. That's pb.com/CrowdCrux to experience shipping made simple with a free trial of SendPro Online from Pitney Bowes. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. Hope you took a lot away. And please take a second to rate and review this podcast on iTunes if you did enjoy the show. It's hard to get iTunes reviews, and I appreciate everyone who ever leaves a review for me because I think that's incredible feedback. So thank you so much if you decided to do that. You know, I was talking at the beginning of this episode of some of the things that I've had to get better at over the years, and I'm sure that you have as well. A great example also of something that I think I'm actually pretty good at now, but that I sucked at when I was getting started was I was horrible at writing, man. Like, I started writing a lot more when I was in high school, and I had this really bad habit of like, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know how to write. So I just kind of wrote the best way that I thought. And when I would show my writing to my teacher, I literally wrote in like really big blocks of text. So it was like I'd fill up an entire page of a notebook and I wouldn't have any paragraphs in that notebook. And I don't know why I didn't think, like I had read books before, like why am I not, making paragraphs and stuff? And my teacher's like, Sal, you gotta have some paragraphs here. This isn't really how you should structure and format your writing. And once they said that, I was like, duh, why didn't I think of that? Or then they talked about your cadence and like you're trying to say too much in these sentences, keep it short and sweet. And then they get into your writer's voice and why is it that you're trying to talk like you're an academic, just sound the way that you sound naturally. And over time, I started to get a lot better at writing, and I do other things like I take classes. So I took classes about creative writing, I took classes about screenwriting, and I was introduced to a lot of great books on how to become a more efficient and effective writer, how to really communicate your points, how do you create it so that someone's reading your actual text and they form an image in their head of what it is that you're describing. And when you talk about, like if it's a food scene, you talk about the way that this tastes and the smells and what it feels like in your hand, and someone starts to create an image in their head. I learned from these books and from these great teachers in my life how to become a better writer, and that's influenced my life. It's why I've been able to publish, 7 books so far, why I've been able to be a prolific blogger and writer. And it's allowed me to connect with a huge base of people that normally I don't think they would be really interested in what I have to say or some of the things that I've discovered. And that's kind of what I learned, is that I love sharing discoveries with my writing. I love to use this ability that I have to communicate and make things much more simple, to share that with the world. And that's kind of what inspired me to write the Kickstarter launch formula and to figure out what all these campaigns are doing so good, so well when it comes to their launches, and how do they get funding? How do they get strangers to be attracted to their campaign? These are the kinds of things that keep me up at night, and like I want to figure out, because it frustrates me that I don't know the answer. And then when I do, I try to make it as simple as possible for you, so you can literally just copy it. You can employ this with your project, and hopefully you also give me a little bit of credit there for at least guiding you on the path. So I wanted to share with you that, and I also want to share with you a link if you're interested in sort of getting access to the Kickstarter launch formula and starting to learn from that. You can go to crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. Go there and you'll discover my audiobook, The Kickstarter Launch Formula. And also, if you want, you can search that on Amazon, and I got a paperback version there. But everything in my life has really been able to be, I guess I could say, any kind of accomplishment that I've had, while I might have like a tiny bit of raw skill, more often than not, I've had to improve things. I'd have to get better at the stuff I'm trying to do. And we all really stand on the shoulders of giants. If it was not for these mentors and teachers and books that I've read in my life, I would not be the writer I am. I would not be the mediocre now chess player that I am, or be any good at fencing, any of these things in my life. I just owe to the hours of practice. And I hope that when you're trying to get better at launching this campaign, you're trying to get better about spreading the thing that you've created to the world and get people interested. I hope that these podcast episodes really do, at least you take away a few golden nuggets that you can apply for your own project. Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Sal, and I will see you next time.